I did 1,000 chess puzzles in a month as a 300 ELO Blitz player. Okay, so I can go here and then there. No. What about that? No, I can't do. What about here? Oh, I found it. Get wrecked, David. I was curious to see how doing 1,000 chess puzzles would affect my rank and understanding of chess, if at all. And when it comes to my rank, frankly, I could use the help. While I was completing 4 figures worth of chess puzzles, I learned some new checkmates. Oh, it's a smother mate! Ooh, let's go! I see it! Some cool new tactics. Does my knight really just go there, but can't he just take with his pawn? Oh, nope. Pawn's pinned, baby. Let's go. Oh, I just gotta move my... Ooh, back where I come from, we call that a discovered checkmate. And I also learned what not to do in a lot of positions. Why? Why else would he put his bishop in front of his queen? If not to go for the f7 square. I hung my queen. 1,000 puzzles down and I'm still hanging my queen. Want to see what I learned and how it affected my elo? Here we go. Okay, so before we actually get into anything, I kind of want to do a brief overview on what chess exactly is and exactly how one even plays the game. If you already know how to play chess and how the pieces move, I'm going to put a timestamp on the video right now that you can skip towards, otherwise I'm going to go over that right now. So what exactly is chess? Chess is a 2-player game with its origins in 7th century India. In chess, there are 2 sides, white and black. White always moves first. Each player takes 1 turn moving 1 piece, and then it becomes the next player's turn. There are multiple ways to win in chess, but the 2 most common are to either have your opponent find themselves running out of time, or trap the king in what's called a checkmate. Moving along, chess is played on an 8x8 grid made up of 64 squares. The rows and columns are ordered with numbers and letters. The lettered columns are referred to as files, and the numbered rows are referred to as ranks. There are 6 different types of pieces in chess, of which each piece has its own set amount. There are 8 pawns, 2 bishops, 2 knights, 2 rooks, 1 queen, and 1 king. Not all of these pieces are created equal, and each piece actually has a numerical value. The higher the better. But the most important thing to know is that the queen is the strongest piece in the game, and the king is arguably the weakest piece in the game, but is the most important. Like a lot of things in chess, piece movement at first is pretty complicated, especially given the sheer number of pieces available. There's actually a strategy called simplifying, which is just basically trading pieces for each other just so there's less overall pieces on the board and it's a bit easier to think things through. Regardless, I'm going to go over pawn movement last as it's a bit more confusing than the other pieces, but there are some fundamentals that each piece follows. Each piece captures an opposing piece the same way it moves, except for the pawn. Each piece outside of the pawn can move forward and backwards, whether that be vertically, horizontally, or in the bishop's case, diagonally. Speaking of the bishop can only move diagonally, and each side has 2 bishops. One occupies the light squares while the other occupies the dark squares. The light and dark square bishops can never capture each other and won't have any interaction in the game at all. However, the same squared bishops will. The knight is a very interesting piece that moves in an L shape. The knight is also the only piece in the game that can jump over or go through other pieces. This is of particular importance during chess puzzles as they often require you to surprise your opponent. The rook can move any number of spaces either vertically or horizontally. It's quite a powerful and straightforward piece, however it's relegated to the sides of the board on setup, so it's a bit harder to activate it and get it into the fight. The queen, on the other hand, is right in the center of the board and is by far the most powerful piece. The queen combines the movement of a rook and a bishop, allowing it to attack vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. You only get one of these, and it's really strong, so you don't want to lose it. The king is probably the most straightforward piece, as it can only move one square in any direction. Under most circumstances, you're not looking to attack with the king, but in certain endgame scenarios, it becomes necessary to get him into the action. Otherwise, you probably want to make sure that the king is protected and out of harm's way. So the pawn is very unique from the other pieces and a little complicated. First, the pawn moves and attacks in different ways. The pawn can move forward, but can only attack diagonally in front of itself. The pawn also can't move backwards. The pawn can move 2 spaces the first time it's moved, but subsequently can only move 1 space afterwards. Lastly, if the pawn reaches the back rank, it can then promote, which means it can turn into whatever piece it wants, including a queen, but not the king. Finally, let's talk about checkmate. Checkmate's difficult to describe, and it's very intuitive once you get it, but at first it's difficult to grasp. If the king is under attack and there's a space it can go to, that's not checkmate, that's just check. Checkmate happens when the king is under attack and there are no more squares to escape to. In this example, the queen is attacking the king. The king is in check, but not checkmate. Now, the queen and rook are covering the A and B rank and also the 8th file. The king has nowhere to go, so therefore this is checkmate. That was a lot of information and it was pretty quick. There are some really good resources out there for piece movement and chess that are much more in depth than what I just gave, but now we're all on the same page, so let's get to puzzles. So what exactly are chess puzzles? Chess puzzles are essentially set positions that have an objective correct solution. While playing normal games against humans, there are tons of legal moves to consider and multiple good moves coupled with many great ones, segmented by horrible ones. Chess puzzles get rid of all the extra noise and ask you largely to solve for checkmate, but not always. Chess puzzles consistently have a correct or right solution, and there isn't any room for ambiguity. In this sense, chess puzzles are a nice respite from an otherwise endless onslaught of very confusing positions where you might not know what to do. I certainly didn't. I don't really want to draw, but I should have taken the draw. I don't know what I'm doing! Oh, it could... Anyways, within chess puzzles, you get a puzzle ranking, which is different than the ELO you play at for real games against real opponents. The puzzle rating will go down if you fail to solve a puzzle correctly on your first try. So it's a reflection of your ability to solve puzzles on your first look without any mistakes or hints. On chess.com, there's another system for ranking your puzzles, referred to as puzzle points, where instead of having the number displayed, it tracks how many puzzles you've completed in total without penalizing you for getting it wrong. Within this system, you can climb the ranks, and I really kind of like this one more than just the raw puzzle number. It made getting the puzzles wrong a little less punishing. This being said, the puzzle ranked system still exists. And while comparison is the thief of joy, most people are going to be looking at their raw puzzle ranks and not necessarily puzzle points system. Within about first, I'd say anywhere from 300 to 500 chess puzzles. My puzzle rating was all over the place. I hadn't done many puzzles before, so it started off at around 1,000. I then got hot, solved a bunch in a row, and ended one day at 1,800. The next day I fell back down to about 1,400, which is about probably the correct-ish place for me to be. At this point, puzzles were really fun, and they actually maintained that. I found puzzles to be enjoyable through pretty much the entirety of this challenge. However, at around maybe puzzle 400 to 500, I started realizing that there was much more of a point to puzzles than I originally thought. For about the first half of this challenge, I was kind of just doing puzzles without much point. They were fun, that's what's important, right? I heard from a lot of, YouTubers and chess people that doing puzzles improves your rank, or at least improves your tactical vision, board vision, whatever else they want to talk about. I certainly took that all in stride, but I wasn't really actively thinking about trying to improve any of these things while I was playing. I was just having a really good time being able to pick up and put down my phone whenever I wanted, unlike a real game, and beating the computer. Speaking of the computer, this is about as good a time as any to explain who David is and why I don't like him. David is one of 4 of Chess.com's personifications of the chess engine called Stockfish. Computers started being better than humans at chess in about the 90s, and have only grown more powerful since. Stockfish is the current strongest chess engine in the world, and is what chess.com uses to analyze your games. David is essentially just Stockfish, but text-to-speech. He also makes comments on your moves, whether they're good or bad. Well, David is always right and is only in the chess review system. Unfortunately, David runs his calculations as if Stockfish was playing itself. So while the correct move, according to a 3,000 plus player, might be what he suggests, if you're far below that rank, which most chess players are, his advice can sometimes be hard to implement because David is seeing 10 steps ahead while I can only see maybe 1 or 2 moves in front of me. So while his advice is good if you want to know the objective correct thing to do in a position, it can often come off as excessively negative and confusing because David can't explain why in low-level terms.
This move loses a knight. You missed an opportunity to win a bishop through a fork. This misses an opportunity to tactically win a knight. You step your king away from the checking queen. This allows the opponent to checkmate the king. Always feels nice to win.
Regardless, after doing them for a while though, I started to realize that puzzles were very meticulous. They were trying to tell me something. They were trying to get me to recognize certain patterns over a variety of board positions to be able to actually pull off a checkmate or a trade up during an actual match. I was aware of some tactics before taking on the puzzles, but doing the puzzles really forced me to recognize the position and understand how to employ them to win. The 2 tactics I most encountered while doing these puzzles was the pin and the fork. When it comes to pins, there are 2 types. There's an absolute pin, which means you can't move this piece at all because it is protecting your king, and moving it would then put the king in check, which is illegal. And then there's a relative pin, which is where the piece is not immobilized because it's not protecting the king. However, moving it would be disadvantageous, as moving it would allow the piece behind it to be captured. This position is a good example of an absolute pin, which I got into with a different friend of mine, of which he used his dark square bishop to block the check from my e8 rook. In this position, this bishop isn't going anywhere. It cannot legally move, as putting the bishop in any different position would have the king be in check. You can't make that move. It's against chess rules. So this bishop isn't going anywhere until this king goes somewhere or this rook goes somewhere. This is a good example of a relative pin. In this situation, the e-pawn is pinned to the queen, but it's not absolutely pinned, as the pawn can make any move it wishes. However, if the pawn does make a move, then I could easily swoop in and take the queen. And the queen is worth a heck of a lot more than a pawn, so you're never really going to want to make this trade. In this sense, the e-pawn is relatively pinned to the queen. Absolute and relative pins came up a lot while I was doing chess puzzles. And there were a lot of times where I was doing puzzles where I didn't quite understand what the solution was, and the answer was really just hitting me right in front of the face because a piece couldn't actually move or protect the king because it was pinned. Forks, in contrast, are when you attack 2 pieces with 1 piece. The most powerful fork is when you check the king while also attacking another piece. Your opponent has to respond to the check, which usually results in you getting a free piece. Forks with knights can be devastating to you or the opponent's position, as knights have just really odd movement and can go over and through pieces. This is a made-up position, but one that I think demonstrates a fork pretty well, and also the ultimate fork. In this position for white, if they were to move their horse to f7, they would be forking both the king and the queen. Due to the check that the knight is applying to the king has to move. And since the queen has no way of getting rid of the knight, and on the next move, the knight will capture the queen. Most forks aren't going to be quite as extreme as in this situation, however, they can be just as effective. Forks came up about as often as pins did when I was doing my puzzles. And while there are many other chess tactics that are just as, if not perhaps even more important, I felt that after doing a lot of chess puzzles, my tactical vision for both pins and forks really did improve pretty dramatically and pretty measurably. I certainly still missed both, but I was often looking for forks when I otherwise wouldn't, and actually found a couple that were pretty cool and really helped me win the game. This all being said, how exactly did chess puzzles affect my elo and in-game prowess? So how exactly did doing 1,000 puzzles affect my chess play in general? When I was first writing this script, I was pretty suspect of how much it changed my overall game. Yes, my elo did improve over the month that I was playing. It went from about 200 to 300, which is no small feat. However, I was questioning whether that was because I was actually getting better solely through puzzles, or if it was because I was just playing more chess because I was doing more puzzles. And perhaps separating the two doesn't necessarily need to happen. I mean, they do both end up getting to the same destination of playing chess. And playing more generally means you are going to get better. It's not a particularly huge secret. And while I was able to identify things like pins and forks much better than I ever would have been had I not done 1,000 puzzles, I still didn't really feel like I was identifying them in the moment as much as I was hoping to, given how many puzzles I did. I think there's two things happening here. One is that if you ever do come across a board that resembles something you find in a puzzle, I found it to be extremely helpful. There's a couple of rook sacrifices to get checkmate that I never would have seen had I not had to drill them in puzzles. Yet, I also feel that something was happening here that happened when I was playing Street Fighter. And that was being unable to link what I was doing in practice mode, or in this case, the chess puzzles, to the actual game. The same kind of thing applied here with the chess puzzles, where, sure, when I'm looking for a fork or looking for checkmate in 1, 2, or 3, I can identify that. But in match, I'm just really concerned about not blundering my queen. So I often felt like while I was making some progress, it wasn't really enough to actually make maybe a measurable difference on my overall gameplay. This all being said, I did improve, so there must have been some effect, and I don't doubt it at all that there was an effect, and frankly, puzzles are really fun. I think I actually enjoy puzzles more than playing the actual game, at least at this stage. Regardless, I think the most important aspect that I learned from doing all of these puzzles is that chess is really, really hard, and I don't know if just doing 1,000 puzzles in 1 month is really going to change your elo or your overall game to the extent that maybe one would want it to. If I were to do 500 puzzles a month for 12 months, I think the effects would be dramatic. The consistency of doing chess puzzles over a longer period of time versus jam-packing them all into 1 month would make a much larger impact on both your tactical vision and your overall game. Or at least I think so anyways. This conclusion isn't that much different than the one I reached while doing Street Fighter, which was reducing the amount of games played at any one time, but playing them over a longer period of time will probably get a much better result than doing what I did. That being said, I really liked this was really fun. I had a really good time. I think chess puzzles are extremely relaxing, enjoyable, and I would recommend them for anybody who's just, trying to get into chess or even playing more from the beginner level to the expert. 5 out of 5 would highly recommend. So that's it. First, I want to thank you for watching the video. It really means a lot. It really does. This video was kind of a nightmare to get done. There were a number of problems, including deleting almost about half of my recorded chess puzzle footage. That one wasn't my fault. I also then started the timeline in DaVinci Resolve in the wrong frame rate, so I had to restart, which wasn't fun. That one was my bad. I have one more video idea along this similar lines that I would like to get out, but I'm always looking for suggestions, so if you have anything you'd like to see me do, please let me know in the comments section below. That's it for me, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.